Hello, YouTube. So it looks like the attack on Ukraine is turning into an absolute catastrophe for Russia. And there are many lessons of history to maybe pay attention to here. Maybe the oldest being, yeah, never ascribe something bad that someone's done to Machiavellian malevolence when you can equally ascribe it to incompetence. And you just take a look at this as an invasion plan, and it makes no sense at all. It's driving on one axis, two axis, three axis, four, five. This is just not how invasions are normally done. And you take a look at some of the interviews that have been done with these sort of captured Russian soldiers, and they say, yeah, we were just sat here on the border being told that we were doing exercises, and then we were told to go and invade. It's like, no, you don't. You've got to prepare an army for an invasion like this. And then you take a look at, there are people who have armored vehicles running out of gas. And no, the whole thing about an invasion like this in modern warfare is it has to be done quickly. They're essentially wars of maneuver. You have to get into place quickly, which is where you see photos like this, where they say there's a convoy heading for Kyiv, and you just take a look at this, and this isn't a convoy. this isn't moving. This is a car park, and no, I mean the second you've got giant car parks in your attack, it's a disaster. All the stuff in here was actually needed somewhere to supply troops. All the time it sat there, it's just being consumed and it's not achieving anything. It looks like the invasion is a disaster, and this is maybe not a. It's debatable whether this is a good or a bad thing. In that, at some point, Russia will need an exit strategy here, and there's the old saying that cornered beast is twice as dangerous. Anyway, the whole thing's got an awful lot of blowback. It reminds me of the Winter War, which was fought about the beginning of World War II, before it was actually really World War II. And Germany had lots of success in invading all these countries, and they'd been doing fantastically. And so the Soviets, the USSR, decided they wanted to get in on the action, and so they decided they were going to invade Finland. And it's like, yeah, Soviet Union, with the largest land army in the world, attacking Finland, and you so take a look at it on the maps, where we're at, and most of the people in Finland live in this bit in the south-ish. You get an idea from the road density, but you got Helsinki down here, which is an awful lot of the people. Anyway, so most of the war was fought around this sort of area. But the thing that was surprising is that even though on paper it was a comical mismatch, the Finns did fantastically well on several fronts. First of all, they were very motivated. They were defending their homes. They had the home terrain advantage. They were familiar with the terrain they were fighting on. And, again, they were fighting against Russians that were sort of, conscript army, poorly trained, poorly coordinated, and so forth. And the bottom line, it was a disaster, it was a humiliating disaster for the USSR. In fact, it's one of the things that convinced Hitler, who was all the way up to about here at the time, I think, halfway through Poland, that, his assessment of Russia was that all you had to do was kick in the door and the whole rotten edifice would fall down. This was basically evidence that it was correct when, the largest land army in the world is struggling to take Finland. Now, it turns out that in the end they did kind of win. They went to sort of peace talks and they got all these land concessions off of Finland. But the point was still made that, you've got this ginormous country. Not all of it's that greatly habitable, it must be said, but nonetheless, they had a giant country with a giant land army fighting some crappy little country on its border, and they were really struggling. And so here we are, some 80 years later, and Ukraine starts to look very much like a rerun of this, in that, yeah, Russia fielded, some significant fraction of their land army on the border here, and then they tried to invade, and it's basically stalled. Yeah, modern warfare like this, the way that you do it, you've got to do as much as you can before the enemy can successfully mobilize and do things to sort of inhibit your military responses. Now, this started, my expectation was, the first day they had this aerial assault on one of the airfields. Airfields aren't hard to spot. I think it's the one to the north. Anyway, so you have the aerial assault on the airfield. You drop your paratroops in there, and then you use this to fly in a load of extra troops, and then you just use those to drive into Kiev and seize power. This would be the sort of optimal strategy, in that once you cripple the command and control, then things maybe become, the resistance becomes less coordinated. Not what happened at all. They drop their paratroopers in, and they get repelled from the airfield. They've lost some of their, their best and most motivated troops doing this, and they got nothing to show for it. And then it's like, all right, well, we'll invade from the north, from Chernobyl. And it all starts to bog down very quickly, to the point where, you take a look at the aerial pictures of the convoys heading towards Kiev, and it's like, are they actually going to consume? This has to sort of supply an invasion army. Well, yeah, that invasion army is going to, the longer it goes on, uh, if the convoy isn't big enough, then you're just going to run out of supplies. And that kind of looks like where it's going. That, you get these stories that, in the first days of the invasion, there were armored vehicles pouring over the border, and now basically they're just stuck there and doing, they don't go on. And part of it is, even if you could get into Kiev, right? Kiev is a city of 2 million, 3 million, something like that. And the building style here is very much like it is here in Prague, in that, you take a look at how the buildings are constructed, um, and they have immensely thick walls on them. It looks a bit derelict, but so it's basically poor man's air conditioning, or heat control. Is you make the walls incredibly thick, that such that, in the institute where I work at, the walls are the best part of a meter thick. The bottom line is it gives, it's basically, the insulation is built into the building. So when you get long cold winters, well, the building sort of cools down, and then you get long hot summers, and it warms up again, and it's the sort of thermal hysteresis. It'd be nice if we could actually get some sort of bead on how thick the walls are. But, these are the buildings you sort of expect to, you can sort of shell forever at these buildings with modest effect. Um, and yeah, you just take a look at, imagine trying to get tanks through here with, any one of these windows can contain anti-tank missiles or guys with small arms. It's an absolute bloody nightmare to even think about trying to invade a city like this. And, once you've decided that you're down to sort of shooting wars, and we get out of this one. Once you're down to shooting wars, this now actually has sort of blowbacks again to World War II. And there were two big sieges. The Germans, a year or so later, they go all the way up to St. Petersburg, so yeah, fairly decent-sized city. I think St. Petersburg, it's several million these days. Anyway, Hitler, having got all of his troops up here, and at the end of a long supply line, decided that there's no real need to waste my tanks and my best troops in street fighting in a city. So he ordered the whole thing to be sieged up, and thus began the siege of St. Petersburg, which was one of the most bloody sieges in history. So at their peak, they were starving at a rate of something like 4,000 a day in St. Petersburg. A couple of years later, it was all broken, and the Germans were all pushed back. But interestingly enough, so in the first year of the war, the Germans get all the way up to St. Petersburg, almost all the way up to Moscow, and halfway across Ukraine, they get up to Mariupol or something, and then they get pushed all the way back to here. In the next year, they drive all the way into the Caucasus and end up at a city called Stalingrad, which before it was called Stalingrad was called Volgograd, and after it was called Stalingrad was also called Volgograd. And this time, having actually got to the city, Hitler ordered that they take the city, and so they actually went into the city and engaged in the street fighting. And of course, when you do this, all the advantages that you had from a profession, all the time their army was in the open fields, of which there was quite a lot, they had fantastic advantages, in that they could move quicker than the enemy, so you can outmaneuver the enemy, encircle them, and all that sort of thing, because they had, the joint arms, firepower, and all that sort of thing, and a better coordinated military. However, once you get into a city, all of that vanishes. There is no more wars of maneuver in a city. The tanks become almost liabilities and death traps rather than, things that will intimidate the ground troops. And, you take a look at these lessons, and you take a look at Kiev, sorry. And yeah, I just don't think it's possible first of all, their troops haven't really even got there yet. And even if they do, your options are the sort of St. Petersburg thing, where you can encircle the city and try and starve it. Not so sure that's going to fly very well in the modern world. Or you can try and invade. And if the whole city by this point has been flooded with small arms and rocket-propelled grenades and all that sort of thing, forget about it. I think in total the Russians had some 200,000 troops, not very well motivated, not very well trained, and for some dumbass reason attacking on 5 axes at once. It's one of the most central axioms of military stuff is you don't split up your force. It's concentration of force. You don't split up your force, which seems to be exactly what Russia has done. Now, so it comes the interesting or the difficult question. Well, first of all, it's Russia who has already reached out with peace talks 5 days in. This is not panning out how they planned. And the irony is, so I was playing a roguelike. I was playing Angband a few days ago, and I had stuff playing in the background. And what it's just sort of spooling through news, and it comes to Zelensky, and this was days before the invasion, and he basically lays out exactly what the problem is, and that the West won't do anything to help him because blah blah blah. Yeah, Russia's always threatening to invade. No one takes it seriously. All right, let's take a quick listen.
requires proof. It requires something more than just tweets and statements in mass media. Action is needed. The world needs this action, not Ukraine. We are going to protect our country with or without support of our partners, be it.
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely lays it out, but basically, yeah, everyone just assumes that Putin is doing the saber rattling, and if I'm trying to rationalize Putin's actions, the thing that makes the most sense to me, I'm not entirely sure this is sensible in that I'm not sure Putin's actions are. Um, there is no real point in trying to work out what the rationality behind his reasoning is, because there might not be any there in the first place. He might just not function in the way you would expect a rational leader to function. But I mean, let me just project rationality on him for a second. He sees this, and the West basically does nothing, and therefore it's like, yeah, we'll invade. The world won't do anything, and it'll be just like our invasion of the Crimea a few years ago. We'll annex the whole thing in a few days, and boom, it'll be dead easy. And we will have expanded our borders again, and taken Ukraine back into the fold. Um, just and the other thing that came on after Zelensky was the Russian ambassador speaking. Not that one. It's this one. This was also before the invasion. And yeah, I listen to strange things when I'm doing other stuff. And what's bizarre about this is you go through all the other people talking, and they're all supremely diplomatic at the United Nations. Dear colleagues, esteemed fellows, blah blah blah. And they speak in passionate, reasonable tones until the Russian ambassador comes up. And it's just such a change in tone. It almost has to be seen to be believed. Let's take a quick look.
The agenda item which we are meeting to discuss today has clearly been given the wrong title. If it is supposed to reflect reality, then it should not be temporarily occupied territories, but rather territories lost as a result of the hate-filled policy against its own citizens that Kiev has turned into a national idea after the illegitimate Maidan coup of 2014.
I mean, it's just the most absurdly rhetoric-laden buzzword feed that you can think of. It's just completely on a different level from everything else. And yeah, he was giving a talk today, which was a somewhat different flavor. I can't quite remember what he was saying today.
Agreement to move our troops, even for the exercises, at a certain distance, not to provoke each other, and that appeal has been addressed to NATO a long time ago, to which it never reacted. I remember the last conversation between.
That's right. He's blaming it all on NATO. That a long time ago we asked NATO to not conduct exercises on our border or something to antagonize us. And it's like, what the hell are you on? You just stationed 200,000 troops on a border and invaded somebody else's country. And now you're blaming that on that sometime in the past, you say that you asked NATO to not do exercises on the border and they never listened to you. And yeah, sounds like the lady doth protest a little too much. Anyway, so this is the bit that kind of worries me, is, the cornered animal is twice as dangerous. And I don't see that there are any sensible exit strategies for Russia here. I mean, maybe the best, if I want to project rationality and competence onto this, then I might suggest that all of this is a huge diversion, and basically all they want to do is grab the land bridge here which is something they've been after for a while, and then they'll call it quits. But it really just doesn't fit. The amount of troops they've committed up here is crazy. I think this is where the huge convoy is. And so another thing you got to know about Ukraine. First of all, there aren't that many roads. You take a look at a lot of this stuff, and it's an absolute bloody nightmare for an invasion if anyone has any air power whatsoever. So if you're trying to put some huge convoy down one of these roads, first of all, if you blow up something on the roads, you can't just drive your military vehicles around the outside, because the soil, the terrain here is notoriously notorious for, especially when it rains, turning into a quagmire. An impassable quagmire, such, the first tank you can maybe get around, and then it just turns into muddy soup, and any vehicle that just drives in there just sinks. So all you need is to blow up one or two vehicles in the convoy, and the whole thing is crippled for an extended period of time. And this is before you get on to, there'll be bridges. There's a railroad. It's quite useful. Anyway, yeah, so there's got to be streams and rivers around here somewhere. Yeah, here you go. Here's one. At least I assume. Yeah. You usually have bridges over the little creeks and the such like, and you blow those up, and again, you stall a convoy like this for 1+ days, and yeah, so it's I don't know how they're doing on keeping they do have some air power functional, but even if you don't, there aren't many. Here's our road. Yeah, there aren't many. Okay, I'm not seeing a lot of bridges, but yeah, any overpass or anything like that, you blow up something like that, and you can stall a column like this for days, because there are no easy ways to go around. Yeah, this was one of the problems in World War II, is that there aren't that many roads, and you block them up, and you basically have prevented you've stopped the invasion for a day. And for every day that it's not doing something, that gives you another day to hand out weapons where you want to defend, and to prepare your defenses further out. Anyway, so the bit that worries me is Putin's saber rattling on the nuclear weapons. So this is a bit of a problem. No sane man would use nuclear weapons. I mean, especially against. Problem with nuclear weapons is they're not that much use on the battlefield. They're only any good if the enemy has concentrated all of its troops in one place. Against cities, they're pretty reasonable. They do an awful lot of damage, but they're not a weapon that you can sensibly use if you plan to occupy the country afterwards. Yeah. They cause too much devastation, and they make things radioactive and all that sort of thing. So when Putin is rattling his saber about nuclear weapons, there are no troop concentrations here, and destroying cities, well, difficult to claim that you're there as liberators if you're nuking the cities. And, well, what about nuking other places in the wide world? Well, that's also an option, which normally I would say no sane man would do this. But I would have also said that no sane man would have invaded Ukraine. And if they were to do it in such a piecemeal and haphazard fashion, such that the whole thing falls apart within 5 days. And yeah, part of this does go back to Russia. It's true, has a fairly large military, but it's not that large, and it's not that. This is winter war type stuff. Yes, it's large, but is it capable? And if you just take a look at it in terms of GDP, the GDP of Ukraine is about the same size as Italy. Sorry, the GDP of Russia is about the same size as the GDP of Italy. So, and yeah, if you were looking at occupying the country by force, it's 40 odd million people there, and Russia thus far has 0.2 million troops. It's just a non-starter. So yeah, I worry that a man. I'm worrying about ascribing sane behavior to a man who has, over the past week, displayed none of it. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on, Russia and the invasion of Ukraine, which I don't think is. Well, I mean, it looks like it's going fairly well for Ukraine. They've done fantastically in that. Zelensky. He stood his ground in Kiev. Even though it was a fairly reasonable assumption that if the Russians actually do capture him, they'll kill him. And so he's got real skin in the game, and he stayed and fought. And loads of other people also look like they've stayed and fought. And it's also united some huge part of the rest of, especially Europe. Right? So historically, Germany has been very standoffish in giving people weapons. They've got kind of a bad history when it comes to sort of weaponry and war and all that sort of thing. So they've got a sort of largely pacifist charter. Same, bizarrely enough, with Japan. And even they've sort of softened in the last day, and it's like, nah, sod this. We'll happily send them military stuff. And even Hungary, who is actually fairly pro-Russian, they were the last sort of holdouts in Europe for not banning Russia from SWIFT. They've softened now, and so they've kicked Russia out of SWIFT. I mean, it's been a almost united response. I mean, it's one of those bizarre things that Zelensky, all of his wishes basically came true once the invasion took place. Before then, it was like no one gave a shit about Ukraine. They just, whatever, And now that they've actually been full-scale invaded, everyone is kind of back in Ukraine, to the point, on the world stage, when it came to the votes, not even China could bring themselves to vote with Russia on this. So China abstained. It's also been kind of this has been one of the few times when both the UK and Europe have basically just completely locked up and said, yeah, no, we're doing exactly the same thing in helping Ukraine. Which extends up to giving them military weapons. And like I was saying, you flood military weapons into a place like Kiev, sorry. This invasion that looks like it fell apart in 5 days, it's going nowhere. Anyway, I've gone on probably too long. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, maybe give it a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.